message. The future is not set.
All right, thank you so much, Joe and my co-presenter, Ken, for all of your assistance today, and thank you for all of you guys attending to hear my rather lovely but loud, I hope, voice. Ken, would you like to go ahead and introduce yourself really quickly?
Yes, thank you. My name's Ken Vedaa. Once again, I want to thank everyone for coming out. I want to thank Rebecca for all the hard work she's been doing to pull this together, so that's been a great blessing. But yes, hopefully we'll have a little fun.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Now, we tried to go ahead and tier this presentation to small and medium-sized businesses, and I feel as though since this is my first public presentation in cybersecurity, why not do it amongst fellow friends, right? And so just a little bit about me outside of what Joe said. I have a dual master's in criminal justice and counterterrorism, as well as I have spent most of my time in the legal field. I was a paralegal, a legal secretary, and then I decided to go ahead and make the switch over into the forensic lab. And now I am actually on my second year as a consultant with my employer. And I know that I just spoke to Melissa from the last presentation a couple of minutes ago, because prior to all of that, I was actually a mixologist. So she and I will be having a great conversation after this for sure. And so just to go ahead and just throw out a disclaimer here, the presentation that we have today, our thoughts in regards to it are ours and ours alone. They are not of any current or past employer. Now we're going to go over a couple of things in regards to this presentation here. And so we're going to go from everything from the impact of the call that we do not want to be a part of, different assumptions, attorneys, how digital forensics will be involved, as well as we'll go ahead and take a couple of questions that you may have after our presentation. Now, first in regards to impact, as you can see here, we have both ransomware and business email compromises. Of course, the commonality between these two are that these are primarily for financial gain. These impact all types of businesses, whether they're large or small. Anybody and everybody can certainly be a victim of a cyber attack. Now, I know that we all know these, but I do want to go over them really quickly. In regards to ransomware, you see here that it's malware that is used to encrypt your devices, networks, systems until a payment is made. And while these threat actors will go ahead and say that they're going to, after the payment, go ahead and actually release this information, we know oftentimes that they do not. They may go ahead and exfiltrate it and try to shame you as a business owner, or they may go ahead and delete it on you if you don't pay whatever their rate is or on time. And a couple of examples of that is WannaCry and CryptoLocker. And then we have on the other side here the business email compromise, and that is an email scam where attackers impersonate a trusted source using a spoofed, lookalike, or compromised account, and recipients will perform the requested task that will lead to scammers gaining access to sensitive data, funds, or accounts. And we have a couple of examples here for that. We have the Children's Healthcare of Atlanta, where there was a $3.6 million loss after there was an announcement to have a 70-acre new hospital building built, and unfortunately, the contractors, the attackers went ahead and actually spoofed the emails of the contractor, stating to have that payment be redirected to another location, and unfortunately, they fell for it. And then on the other side of that, we also have the Elkin Valley Baptist Church attack from North Carolina. And after spending almost a decade trying to have the funds collected from the church so they can actually build a new facility, attackers stole over half of it to the total of $793,000 through the BEC campaign. It was unfortunately because the church secretary seen the legitimate email, but then she saw an email right afterwards that said, hey, why don't you go ahead and pay this payment instead over here? And unfortunately, she didn't think twice, and she went ahead and paid it to the attackers. Okay, now we're going to go over a couple of assumptions here. Now, we are again, tiering this to companies that do have cyber insurance. And if you do not have it already, if you're a business that has a website, accepts credit card payments, has personally identifiable information, that data is considered vulnerable and definitely in need of it. So we strongly suggest to get it. This deciding who to call is going to be shaped by your cyber insurance firm, and definitely want to make sure that you get to know that list, because the last thing you want to waste is time when you are on the phone with your representative and they don't know who you are. So definitely make sure that you get to know them as early and quickly as possible. And now we have the coverage and limitations of what those policies look like. Now, for the first-party coverage, there's the direct impact for businesses, and that's anything that can be covered from data destruction, hacking, extortion, public relations, notifications of clients, letting them know how they were affected, letting them know that if they're going to receive that through an email or through postal mail, there will be additional credit monitoring services, loss of income for both the business employees, and even some more money to either repair or replace affected computer systems. And then, of course, the deeper analysis to identify the attack source. Whereas the third-party coverage, that's going to address anything from small businesses who provide services to other businesses, and there will be privacy liability, legal costs, settlements and judgments, where coverage for payments may be provided to settle lawsuits, and then, of course, defamation and intellectual property infringement, and that's where the claims for libel and slander would be, and copyright infringement. Now, there are some policy limits that, again, are dependent, so you want to make sure that you actually look at your contract as well as speak to your representative. Now, we have a type of business that would be affected here. So if you have a technical, a financial, or a medical business such as a hospital, you may end up with a higher rate versus, let's say, a local bake shop or a construction firm. Company size, more employees, higher rate, sensitivity levels, and the amount of data. So if you have credit cards, personally identifiable information, again, large amounts of records, that will go ahead and attribute to higher rates. Annual revenue, if you have more money, bigger rate usually. Now, if you have prior claims, the more claims, the higher cost, and sometimes you'll have cyber insurance firms that will outright dump you and just say, hey, get it together. And then you finally have the security measure strength. So the more education that you are giving to your employees and your vendors and your contractors, there's going to be potentially a lower rate for that. Now, above all this, there are some exceptions to that rule. There are everything from criminal proceedings to intentional acts such as insider threats, frauds, dishonesty, criminal conduct, funds transfers, infrastructure interruptions such as losing your gas, electricity, and hot water. Prior breaches may not be a part of the policy, and business interruption of systems under the control of a third party. And then poor security practices, again, any ineffective security process or poor configuration management. And then finally, cost. Some of the policies are going to be dependent on all of those things, and you'll have a yearly premium or deductible or retention. We see that smaller businesses have anywhere between $1,000 and $7,000 for a plan. We're averaging around between $2,000 and $3,000 a year. And then as the business grows, you may see some larger firms that have the $50,000 retention for a $5 million policy, or a $100,000 retention for a $10 million policy. Now, your insurance will often suggest that your first call will be to an approved attorney. The purpose of this representation will lead the investigation directly into the cyber incident, potentially bringing protection of attorneys or attorney-client privileges or work product client privileges will be brought into this investigation. And of course, we know that businesses and business owners want to be able to just get stuff done, get it right away, get them to be able to just get back together and keep going so they're not losing any more money that they have. But of course, this is where we try to explain to businesses that we need them to slow down, because what we don't want them to do is speak to a law firm that they did not provide that attorney-client or that work-client knowledge that says, hey, I can go ahead and tell anybody I want, even though we just had this introductory call. So we always want to make sure that we avoid that, because laws vary from state to state. So whether that's you writing it down or you're having a conversation about it, you definitely want to go ahead and check the laws there. And then from all of that, we bring in the computer geeks. Did you want to say something to that?
Yes. So one thing, as Mary pointed out earlier, one of the challenges in this is that everything that takes place from the time that you've been hit by ransomware, or you've been hit by business email compromise, that you have this big negative impact that you're trying to work with, is that you now have at least a two-fork road that you need to deal with. Number one is you need to return to operation. If possible, you need your money back, you need your systems operating, you need to be able to do business. Second is that there's likely going to need some type of investigation, some type of report. You might have liability in a potential lawsuit, you might have regulatory concerns, you might have notification requirements. And so we need to work with the impacted party to find a path forward to do both as reasonably well as we can in a bad scenario. So that notion is maintain and protect the investigation, and B, help them get back to work. And so that creates a series of questions that we're going to dig into now.
All right, great. Well, just before we go ahead and dig into that fully, we do have attorneys that will have preferred forensic firms. We definitely do like that in many ways, because we know that the attorneys have worked with those places previously. They may be experts in certain areas, such as the business email compromise or ransomware, but they also may understand that firm's strengths and weaknesses. But whatever you do, you definitely want to confirm that the DFA firm that you are going to bring in to help you with your compromise is actually approved by your insurance firm.
Now, I personally had a great deal of fun during my years working in DFA. So I was actually a law student while working as a principal consultant. So every one of those cases that we dealt with, we had attorneys that we were dealing with. And while I had a background and spent many years doing incident response, I was one of the few people who had some legal exposure to that. So my opportunities to deal with attorneys was always slightly different than many of my peers. Now, we often will have the situation where the attorneys will quickly turn around and try to bring whatever DFIR firm that they think is appropriate for a case onto the call early. Largely, this is because they don't want the impacted party, the victim, to have to repeat the story and all the information multiple times. So they're going to want to have this first call, sometimes in the middle of the night, sometimes on the weekend, holidays, and try to lay out as much information that's relevant to get this first plan of action together while everyone's in one place. Now, this often starts with just a request to the party who's impacted what's happened. We want them to tell us in their own words what is taking place. Have they had a ransomware event? How many systems are impacted? But you want to let them tell the story, because in part of that story, they're going to tell you things that are important to them. Hopefully in this, you're going to learn, what impact do they have? What are the systems that we need to fix to get back in business? Where is the sensitive information? Now, if we get through that first what has happened question and we don't get all the answers that we were hoping to find during their basic description, then we prod them along with follow-up questions. We're going to ask them, what is the timeline of incident? When was the first time you noticed anything? Was there anything leading up to that you knew that there was a vulnerability, you knew that there was a problem that could have contributed? So we're trying to find, eventually, many of you might be familiar with the reference to the spreadsheet of doom. So this idea is you're working on collecting all your information, trying to build that timeline and working to find what your patient zero is, because that's going to give you a lot of information. So this timeline is something that will at least let you put some stakes in the ground to help identify that as a possibility. Then is there a suspected system? Is there something that you believe that you might not know outright that one particular box or one particular user was the start of an incident, but you'd be surprised how often people have an inkling about what they've seen, and that those questions can narrow that search down and try to get to that point where you're moving forward with investigation relatively quickly. How much impact? How many systems? Are all your systems down? Are there certain public-facing systems that are down? You're trying to, once again, devise that plan, figure out what is going to be needed to do as you move forward with your investigation. Now, we have, yes. Okay. One of the big things, the question is simply, for each organization, each group is going to have their own mindset about what the crown jewels, what are the important things to them. Now, we're going to want to dive into this a little bit now. Are there going to be things related to these crown jewels that are going to be triggering possible regulatory or contractual notification? Regulatory is going to be things such as PII, health records, financial records, other things that could be important that might not have regulatory concerns but have contractual concerns. What is your customer base like? What type of relationship, what type of contract do you have with your customers, and is their information potentially exposed in this? And do you have any obligations to notify them or to protect them in these particular scenarios? Let's see. So type of data, once again, we're going to be hitting those big points on, do you have PII? Do you have financial records? Do you keep insurance records for your company? Surprising number of companies manage and process their own insurance claims, and that can leave you a mountain of health records and sensitive information on your system that just might not be on the mindset of a lot of people. Now, I will tell you, having taken a lot of these calls in the middle of the night and on weekends, it's alarming how many people, either due to the stress of the moment or simply because it's just not something they worry about day to day, don't feel comfortable answering these questions. So sometimes you have to take time and walk people through, and if they do know that they have information, it's also just rather scary that many people don't know where that information resides in their environment. So we'll talk about it a little bit later, but the notion of collecting this information and having a ready reference to be able to point the question, where is this particular information, can go a long way to making a medium level incident response not become a really long level incident response.
It's funny that you mentioned that, Ken, actually, because there was one time, and I'll never forget it, because I was just starting in the forensic lab, and they said, hey, Mary Nana, are you free this Friday afternoon? And that's kind of one of the worst things you want to hear, but the best thing that you want to hear, and you already know how this story goes. They said, we need you to fly out to California to go ahead and image just a couple of laptops. And I said, okay, sure, not a problem. It's Windows. I'll go ahead and get my stuff together, and I'll just go ahead and fly out. And I get there, I walk into the room with everybody at the board table, and I'm now staring at 27 MacBooks and Windows machines, and they're like, hey, we don't know where any of the data resides for this case. And I said, wait, what? You have no idea whatsoever. They just said, no, we have no idea on anything, so we need all of the help on top of the ransomware investigation that was occurring. So unfortunately, I had a Friday afternoon that ended up turning into a 5-day play event that I ended up having to work. And even though we were able to get all of their data back, something as critical as knowing where that data resides is certainly important.
Now, going back to describing the environment, a lot of these things are going to be very basic, and a lot of you who work in IT or InfoSec will probably have a pretty good grasp of this for your environment. But this goes on the idea of how many systems you have. Where are the systems? Are they geographically distributed? The idea of understanding the types of systems, and this is going to be anything from what type of platforms you have, what type of operating system, what are their roles in the environment, because all of this, in large part, is going to be back to once you have the forensics analysts on site, they're going to start parsing through this information and understanding what is normal for environment. We're going to talk a little bit later about, this can go everything from the nature of the system itself, the purpose of the system, what it's doing, and also just as an environment. We'll talk a little bit later about, are you a company that works banker's hours, or you're a company that has operations 24/7? Because this is all going to change what this looks like, because anytime you're hunting for problems in the environment, you're looking for what is not normal, and you can't really understand what is not normal unless you have a pretty good grasp on what normal is to begin with. Now, with that, big things for us also go into notion of general exposures. What type of who has administrative rights, who has the ability to access things remotely. Those notions are key places you want to start looking for people who may have been exposed or may have been compromised in your investigation. And the notion of, we also want to know your environment. How would you describe the vulnerability management? How is the patch management in your environment? Are you going to find a lot of systems that simply haven't been updated, or you're running a lot of out-of-date operating systems, because that's going to paint a very different picture from a starting point than someplace that is relatively on top of these particular things and has resources to keep their systems up to date. Yes. So, in my personal experience, a disturbingly high percentage of the compromises we see, especially in the ransomware world, are going to be on remote access to systems. And very frequently, there's going to be systems that were remote accessible, often without some type of MFA. The idea that, now this goes back to our earlier presentation here, we've seen CIS and other people state that a majority of these incidents are actually triggered by phishing. So somebody manages to get a phishing message, triggers the notion of stealing creds, and they can use those creds to get in. So if you don't have a phishing-resistant MFA available for your environment to prevent these type of attacks, it becomes really low-hanging fruit for a lot of the contractors. And oftentimes, I will get one of two responses for a site that's been victimized. A is either, yes, we do require MFA for everything, except for X, and all of a sudden whatever X is now the system we want to start looking at very closely. And B is like, oh, we're planning on rolling out MFA next weekend, which, yeah.
It's a little too late.
Yeah, so it's amazing how often that one comes up. And then the next notion is we want to pivot directly to the idea of what is your backup scenario. We'll talk a little bit later about recommendations, but the idea, do you believe you have backups? Have you tested them recently? Have you tested them since the ransomware event? Do you know that these are viable? We have seen scenarios where people had what appeared to be valid backups that looked to be still viable, but shortly after things went haywire, the threat actor then found them later and destroyed them. So if you think you have backups at this point, if you haven't contained the environment, you want to go ahead and do everything you can to protect them at that point, because otherwise your recovery may well get uglier than you have bet on at that point. Yes, and also the notion of, do you immediately have a safe area to go ahead and start deploying and testing these backups, and that safe area is not on your production environment that has been compromised. So please take the time. If you don't have an environment, you now need to build a quick air-gapped environment, separate everything out, and assume everything is compromised until you have really good reason to believe otherwise. Let's see. Now, as we talked about earlier, the notion of threat actor. So in the middle of the night when I get these phone calls, I'd always open up with the notion that I would really be happy if you do not have to pay this threat actor. But the reality is we won't know that until we're further down the line. Now, my common advice, and most of the attorneys that we work with would make the recommendation that if there was doubt about whether or not you needed to engage and possibly pay a ransom to the threat actor, it made sense to engage them, to reach out to them and establish that communication. Now, frequently, you'll see people working either in the attorney's office or in your DFIR firm play the role of an admin or somebody else in the particular company to talk to the threat actor through whatever portal has been set up to engage in this conversation. The idea of this is you're going to find out what they're asking for, what their terms are, what they claim they can do, and more often than not, you're going to find these conversations take place clearly through some type of translation service. A lot of the people you'll be dealing with, apparently English is not their thing, or they choose not to speak English in these phone calls or in these chat messages originally. Now, the idea of those conversations, even if you do not plan to engage or pay them, you keep that communication alive until you realize that you are now able to then move on. Now, if you must move forward with the possible ransom, you're probably going to make sure you're having a brief conversation with your attorneys, with law enforcement, because there could be ramifications down the road for these. Now, the big ones come up since most of these threat actors do believe to be working out of the nation. You will normally have to run some type of OFAC check to see, are these people on any type of restricted groups that you could be facing federal charges for simply making a payment or engaging with these parties. Separate from that, if you're talking to FBI, which is one of the most common law enforcement agencies to get involved in these scenarios, in public they will tell you consistently, do not pay, do not engage the threat actor. Once you've gone to the end of your investigation, you're going to commonly find those same agents will tell you that if you can't recover, if there's no other option, if you've run everything to ground, well, please share your information with us to let us know what we can do to help. We will look for other alternatives, other encryptors available, decryptors available that might impact the system. They will work with you for that. But if at the end you are stuck, many of those same agents will tell you that, well, if you need to do this, you need to do this. They will never give you those statements publicly, but that's just what I've seen in my experience. And then finally, if you are fortunate enough to be able to recover enough of your systems or rebuild and not need the threat actor, what you've seen in recent years is you'll often see that pivot to, in addition to the regular extortion that is just the ransomware itself, they will often have attempted to steal information while they're in your environment, and this will go into the exploitation phase. They will try to extort you on the notion that we have this information, and if you don't provide us X amount of dollars, normally in some form of cryptocurrency, they will in turn dump this and try to give this to reporters. One humorous story, once again going back to the language barriers, I worked a particular food service incident. Food service company had a big impact. We were fortunate enough they were to have backups, and we helped them get everything stood up and returned to operation. So I was able to tell the threat actor in the chat that, I'm sorry, we're not moving forward, have a nice day. He said, oh, but don't go, we have your banking records. If you don't go ahead and provide us $3 million, we're going to go ahead and push your bank records out. I said, well, my boss is going to need to see some type of proof, and they sent me over a series of screenshots that were the donations that this company had made to food banks. So I felt very good about going to that meeting with the with the CEO and say, well, if you don't pay them $3 million, they're going to start advertising that you give food to food banks. So surprisingly, the CEO was not willing to spend $3 million to prevent that information from coming out. So that was probably the happiest meeting I've ever had in a ransomware incident. So, sorry, so yes. So once again, we talked about earlier on the describing of normal. Every type of investigation, whatever you're doing, you're going to try to find those things that stand out. And what normal is, how frequently are your systems communicating with outside parties? What do you anticipate should be? Now, I've always found this fun because it's very frequent that people, even IT managers who are pretty good at this, as they describe what they think is normal, and when you actually sit down and look at the logs, there's a delta that exists between what is actually happening in an environment, what people think are happening in an environment. But your job is to go ahead and start parse that away and try to find explanations for things. And then once you find things you can no longer explain, there's a very good possibility that what you're seeing is threat actor activity. So that's what's getting fed into your lovely spreadsheet of doom and allows you to go ahead and try to paint the timeline for this particular investigation. Now, we go ahead and talk about future planning. Did you want to?
Yeah, absolutely. And so in regards to future planning, the last thing that we would ever want to see, and I'm just thinking of one situation that happened to a beloved friend of mine, is she went to go to bring her child to a hospital, and because it was not a state-run hospital, they told her that she needed to go ahead and pay a balance before she can actually have treatment. Now, I could imagine that if she went in and wanted to go ahead and pay the bill, and they said, oh, wait a minute, all of the systems are locked down, and we have this message that we need to pay X, Y, and Z before we are able to go ahead and actually clear you to be seen. It kind of just creates just a long whole list of events. So for these small and medium-sized businesses, we want to make sure that the future planning is put in place now so that they do not have to pay for it later. A part of that future planning does include trainings. And so for those trainings, we want to make sure that we're in training employees, vendors, contractors, and we want to make sure they're trained in at least two areas, both the prevention that is looking out for questionable emails, links, and other content that is disguised as legitimate and or urgent, as well as if they are unsure or definitely believe they clicked on something they should not have, then they'll need to know who to contact and what details to provide for that incident. And then, of course, we want to make sure that we're testing them with the drills such as the mock phishing campaigns. And like the earlier presenter said, sounds like we have to discuss also the Fish Your Friends, so I think that's going to be a shameless plug there. We can talk about that afterwards as well. And then also we want to have full incident response plans, and we want to make sure that we're reviewing those maybe even quarterly, and we update it as necessary. And of course, please print it out. The last thing that you ever want to do is have an amazing plan put together, anything and everything all on there, and you can't access it, and even worse, now the threat actors may have it. So you definitely want to make sure that you have that offline. Now, in regards to the one-pager, we want to make sure that we have a bunch of things that are included on that one-pager, and it is all business critical parties that need to be contacted, and that's including your internal teams, that's saying, hey, if we are a victim of this ransomware attack, who do we need to contact to make sure that we are able to go ahead and keep business moving, and let's make sure that they have backup plans to be able to do so. You also want to have contact information, the names, phone numbers, and emails of cyber insurance firms, PR firms, internet provider, mobile firms, and if you have it, as we know, more companies are having cloud providers, you want to have their contact information as well. And then on top of that, you want to have a full plan for your internal employees, their roles and responsibilities. And then you also want to have the relationships established with all of those involved parties, because it will definitely help you that if you are a victim of attack and you go to call them and you just find out right then and there, oh, they just quit. So you definitely want to make sure that you have that information all there in one shot. Now, as for the full plan, oh, go ahead.
I just wanted just to remind me at that point. So keep in mind that incident response plans are not unique to the notion of IT or information security. A lot of businesses use these for other purposes, and one that I talk to my clients frequently about, you may remember I believe it's the Deepwater Horizon down in the Gulf of Mexico many years ago, had their particular bad day that things blew up and we started pumping tremendous amounts of oil into the Gulf. They did have an incident response plan, and they pulled that off the shelf, and as they were looking, and they found out that the primary point of contact to kick off their incident response had actually died 8 years earlier, and there were several pages on the notion of how to go ahead and scrub penguins to get oil off of them. So clearly, the notion of a cut and paste job from other facilities and other times aren't going to be the solution you're looking for should bad things happen. So it is really pays off in a bad event to know what's in there and have that relatively current.
Right, and definitely update that whenever possible. I agree with that for sure. And now onto the full plan. You want to have your entire booklet, and you also want to make sure that's up to date. You want to have everything from the risk assessments that state what is mission critical to continue this business, how could we get hit, what data is most important, as well as how likely would it be used if that information was stolen. So we know about exfiltration of data that will be used to shame a company, but what else can they go ahead and do with it? Can they throw it on the dark web? And now identity theft is happening to all of these people, all because we didn't go ahead and take care of business when we should have done it. Now, we also have encryptions, everything from VPNs, MFAs, MDMs, firewalls, so on and so forth. We want to make sure that all of the devices, laptops, cell phones, networks, backups, that you have all of those encrypted where able. And then speaking of backups, we want to make sure that we're encrypting those too. I have suggested multiple times to use the 3-2-1 plan, especially if you're a small to medium-sized business. That is 3 copies, 2 different formats, and then one of them being in a safe, offline, off premises to be able to access that. You also want to be able to have strong and changing passcodes, because what we see is that we have companies and literal IT companies using the password delete or the password admin. And we want to make sure that we are avoiding something as silly as those in the future, anytime and all times.
Now, to emphasize that point, I've sat in far too many calls where in the middle of the night, the company tells me, yes, we have backups. We're going to queue those up. And then we have the next follow-up call, 2-3 hours, or status check about those backups. They don't work. And a disturbingly high percentage of them wasn't even the threat actor getting to them, which I will say the threat actors have gotten much better at finding the admins who run these backups and doing everything they can to destroy these. But the sad reality is that a lot of backups aren't as good as people imagine that they are. So please take a look at your backups.
And another area that we want to emphasize is access control list. I remember walking into one firm and we were talking about the matter, and they said, oh, everybody has access to everything. And I said, so you mean to tell me if a janitor needs to order more cleaning supplies, you're giving him access to all of the employees' addresses and payment information? And they were like, oh, wait, we didn't think about that. Well, you probably should have. So definitely want to make sure that we are limiting that to what is necessary only. And we want to monitor the data that we have in our systems. And if we see that it has not been accessed within a period of, 2 years, maybe longer, maybe shorter, we want to get that off network and actually store that offline and only get back to it if it's necessary. And then we also need to make sure that we have a plan to tell clients if we are a victim of attack, meaning that if a client sees, oh, hey, I just seen on TV this service that I use from your company and you didn't tell me, so what are you trying to do, hide it? We want to avoid that. So we want to have a plan that we are telling clients what happened, who was affected, how they can go ahead and mitigate or outright avoid the risk, and then keep them updated as that process continues. And then we have security audits, software updates, patches, and then we can even have these small businesses subscribe to certain security blogs, newsletters that will tie closely to the industry that they're in, just for updates to see if their company can or will be impacted either directly or indirectly.
On support of that, I'd also like to note that if you are a business that's doing work with a large number of people, if you have an incident that exposes people's data, you should assume that litigation is coming your way. People are going to move forward. Now, what grounds they have to sue will vary considerably by the jurisdictions involved, where business operations are, where the contracts were made. But you are doing yourself a disservice if you're not engaging counsel and at least laying the groundwork for making sure that what you are doing to protect your environment, to do this investigation, is not become another bullet point in the charges that are going to be brought against you. So there are challenges legally to the notion of, can investigations from incidents be protected in discovery for these type of events, but there's still significant room to make strong arguments that this data can be protected, and as long as the attorneys that are overseeing your investigation are aware of those potential challenges, it can go a long way to making future litigation from your customers, your vendors, your business partners considerably less painful.
Great, thanks for that, Ken. And with that being said, does anybody have any questions?
Yes,
Yes.
You talked about 2 objectives in relation to a ransomware attack.
Yes, sir.
One to determine what happened, and another to recover from the attack and get back to business.
Yes, sir.
Tell me, those 2 are often at odds.
Very much so.
And tell me about the transition from one to another and what you want to have before you start
Sure.
getting back.
So, in many cases, now this is going to depend a little bit on the size and complexity of the environment in question, but in many cases you can do both of those things at a similar time, overlapping critical efforts. but you're going to want to find out which systems are going to be key for possible litigation. So let me repeat back. So the question was largely talk a little bit about those two paths, the notion of recovery and the notion of investigation, and how can you balance those. So with that in mind, we want to go ahead and identify those key systems that are going to be part of the investigation. So think specifically anything with large amounts of PII, anything with financial records, anything with health information. All these things are going to be regulatory requirements that you're going to have to know what happened to those systems. You're going to have to address that and be prepared to report. Now, workstations, endpoints, unless you have reason to suspect that a particular endpoint or workstation is likely a patient zero, may have played a role in early staging of the event, there's a very good chance these workstations are not going to be required. So you can potentially start clearing out workstations early. You want to be cognizant of indications that they might have played a key role in the overall attack, but history has shown that a lot of these things are not as important. You want to go ahead and make sure you're gathering basic information for everything. So if you're already in place with the notion of centralized logging, if you're running everything through a Splunk or some type of syslog system, you're ahead of the game for endpoints, and you can probably be okay. Sanity check that those logs are available. If not, you might have to go ahead and do some basic collections on these systems before you start blowing them away and replacing them. When it comes to the key systems that are important, you're going to want to go ahead and take full forensics images of these systems, because once you have those particular systems as images, then you can go ahead and start working on the replacement and rebuild of those. Now, some environments do maintain spare hardware or have additional ability to span up additional virtual licenses. So if you can build on new hardware in parallel to the investigation, you can get a jump on these things. But once again, you need to be a little bit cautious on what you're doing. You do not want your recovery to step on your investigation. So you want to have those conversations with the key system holders, your subject matter experts, people who really know your particular environment, to understand the sensitivities that exist. So if you flag those items, you can go ahead and kind of put a boundary around them and start working on everything else you need so that you can start plugging those key systems back in as soon as you can after you've cleared those hurdles.
Any other questions? All right, well, thank you very much. We greatly appreciate your time.